Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the apprentice of Martian Manhunter. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop felt like a personal insult. It was a cruel, biting thing, a stark contrast to the gentle spring breeze that had filled Izuku Midoriya's sails only an hour before. Now, it tore at his uniform, whistled a mournful dirge in his ears, and seemed intent on scouring the last vestiges of warmth from his body. He clutched the railing, his knuckles white, the cold metal a poor anchor in a world that had just dissolved beneath his feet. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic. All Might's words. The words of his idol, the number one hero, the symbol of peace. They weren't spoken with malice. That was the worst part. They were delivered with a heavy, regretful kindness that was more devastating than any punch could ever be. It was the sound of a judge passing a final, unappealable sentence. The sound of a door not just slamming shut, but ceasing to exist entirely. Izuku's breath hitched, a pathetic, gulping sound that was swallowed by the city's endless hum. Below, Musitifu was a glittering tapestry of light and life. Cars flowed like blood cells through concrete arteries. Neon signs painted the clouds in garish shades of pink and blue, and the distant chatter of a million lives moving forward rose to meet him. Everyone down there had a place, a purpose, a future. They had quirks, ambitions, dreams that weren't built on a foundation of impossible fantasy. His own dream felt like a ghost limb now, an ache where something vital used to be. For 10 long years, ever since the doctor's sterile office and that single, damning word, quirkless, he had clung to it. He had nurtured it in the face of mockery from his classmates, pity from his teachers, and the silent, heartbreaking worry in his mother's eyes. He had fueled it with thousands of hours of study, filling notebook after notebook with meticulous analyses of heroes, their powers, their fighting styles, their support gear. He had convinced himself, through sheer force of will, that knowledge and heart could bridge the chasm between him and everyone else. All Might had vaporized that bridge with a few sensible, logical, soul-crushing sentences. Without a quirk, you can't be a hero. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image was seared onto the inside of his eyelids. All Might, standing in a cloud of his own steam, his true form a skeletal mockery of his power, his voice filled with an ancient weariness. The truth of his idol was as broken as Izuku's own future. He finally let go of the railing, his hands trembling. The walk down the department store's emergency stairs was a blur. Each clanging footstep on the metal grated on his nerves. He emerged into a back alley that smelled of stale grease and damp cardboard, and then melted into the evening crowd. He didn't know where he was going. He just walked. His feet, acting on some instinct for self-preservation his mind no longer possessed, carried him away from the bustling main streets, away from the cheerful glow of storefronts, and the laughter of friends heading out for the evening. He moved toward the quieter, older parts of the city, where the streetlights were dimmer, and the shadows stretched long and deep. The city noise faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the chirp of crickets. He was on the outskirts of Musitifu now, near the edge of the old forest that bordered the city, a place most people avoided. He followed a cracked and forgotten pavement path, one that led away from the residential areas and up a gentle slope. His mind was a maelstrom of self-recrimination. Stupid Deku. So stupid. What were you thinking, clinging to his leg? You almost got him killed. You saw what happened with the sludge villain. You saw how he was struggling. And you just added to his burden. He stumbled over an upturned root, catching himself on the trunk of a gnarled camphor tree. The bark was rough against his palm. He stayed there for a moment, head bowed, the weight of his own foolishness pressing down on him like a physical load. He had wasted the hero's time. He had learned his most painful secret. He had been a nuisance, a liability. The path ended at a stone torii gate, its vermilion paint faded to a soft, mottled pink and peeling away to reveal the gray stone beneath. A thick curtain of ivy clung to one of the pillars, and the characters carved into the crossbeam were obscured by a blanket of moss. This was a forgotten place. A place that time, and people, had left behind. It felt fitting. Beyond the gate was a small clearing, dominated by a humble, wooden shrine. It was old, clearly, the dark wood weathered by a century of sun and rain. The roof tiles were askew, and a small sapling grew stubbornly from a crack in the foundation. Stone lanterns, their paper screens long since rotted away, stood like silent, moss-covered sentinels. The air here was still and heavy with the scent of damp earth, cedar, and decay. It was profoundly, deeply silent. A silence that felt like a balm on his frayed soul. Izuku walked through the gate, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the packed earth. He approached the shrine, running a hand over the worn, smooth wood of the veranda. This was a place for prayers, for hopes and dreams to be offered up to the kami. His own had just been declared dead on arrival. The irony was a bitter pill. He sank down onto the steps, his back against the support pillar, and finally let the tears come. They weren't loud, racking sobs. They were quiet, desolate things, tracing hot paths down his cold cheeks. He buried his face in his arms, his shoulders shaking with the silent force of his grief. His entire world, the singular focus of his existence, had been a lie. He was nothing. A quirkless, useless Deku. It was in this moment of absolute despair that he first became aware of the other presence. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a feeling. A profound sense of stillness that emanated from within the shrine's shadowy interior, a stillness so absolute it seemed to push back against his own chaotic grief. Slowly, cautiously, Izuku lifted his head, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. He squinted into the gloom. There, seated in a perfect size position in the center of the shrine's main hall, was a man. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark trench coat and a fedora, which seemed oddly formal for such a secluded place. His posture was ramrod straight, his hands rested on his knees, and his head was bowed slightly. He was perfectly, utterly motionless, not the fidgety stillness of a person waiting, but the deep, resonant immobility of a mountain. Izuku's analytical mind, a habit too ingrained to be silenced even by despair, flickered to life. The man's shoes, visible just at the edge of the veranda where he must have left them, were polished to a mirror shine, completely free of the mud and grime from the path. His clothes were pristine. He didn't fit. He was an anomaly, a perfectly cut piece from a different puzzle dropped into this scene of gentle decay. For a long moment, Izuku just watched, his own sorrow momentarily forgotten, replaced by a deep, instinctual curiosity. The man didn't move a muscle. He didn't seem to be breathing. Izuku wondered if he was a statue, but the fabric of his coat seemed too real, the lines of his form too organic. He was meditating, Izuku realized. And with an intensity that was almost frightening, Izuku felt like an intruder. He should leave. He should creep away and leave this strange, solemn man to his peace. He started to push himself up, trying to make as little noise as possible, when the tranquility of the shrine was violently shattered. A man burst through the trees behind Izuku, crashing through the undergrowth with a series of panicked, wheezing gasps. He was scrawny and disheveled, wearing a torn hoodie and clutching a small canvas bag to his chest. His eyes were wide with a desperate, cornered animal terror. "Stay back!" he shrieked, skidding to a halt in the clearing and whipping around. His gaze fell on Izuku, who was frozen halfway to his feet. "Don't move! I'm warning you!" Izuku's blood ran cold. A villain. A petty thief, by the looks of it, fleeing a botched job. His mind flashed back to the sludge villain, to the feeling of being helpless, of being a victim. The villain's eyes darted between Izuku and the path he'd come from. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a sound that spurred him into action. He lunged not at Izuku, but past him, scrambling onto the shrine's veranda. "Get in here, you!" he snarled, grabbing the front of Izuku's uniform and yanking him backward. Izuku stumbled, his head knocking hard against the wooden doorframe. Stars exploded behind his eyes. The villain shoved him into the main hall, putting Izuku between himself and the entrance. "I've got a hostage!" the villain screamed out into the empty clearing. "You hear me? I've got a kid! Back off, or he gets it!" Izuku's head swam. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was a hostage. Again. The universe, it seemed, had a truly vicious sense of humor. He risked a glance at the man who had been meditating. He was no longer still. His head was up, his face visible in the dim light filtering through the door. and it was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. His eyes, which Izuku now saw were a startling, luminous red, were wide with a horror that seemed completely disproportionate to the situation. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his temples bulged. His entire body was rigid, locked in a state of absolute paralysis. The thief, seeing the other man, laughed a ragged, breathless sound. 2 for the price of 1. My lucky day. Both of you, don't even think about it. To emphasize his point, the villain held up his free hand. A small, flickering flame, no bigger than a candle's, danced to life on his palm. My quirk ain't much, he hissed, his breath hot and sour on Izuku's neck. But it's enough to burn this whole place down with you in it. So don't try anything funny. The flame was small. Pathetic even. But the effect it had on the man in the trench coat was instantaneous and profound. A choked, guttural sound escaped the man's lips. He flinched back as if the tiny flame were a raging inferno, a flicker of something green shadowing his features for a barest fraction of a second. It was a reaction of such primal fear that it momentarily stunned both Izuku and the villain. From John's perspective, the world had ended. The flicker of orange light was not a candle flame. It was the consuming, planet-scouring plague of Ramirez's curse. The scent of burning wood was not the old shrine. It was the psychic echo of a billion Martian minds screaming as they were incinerated. The villain's cackle was the victorious cry of his treacherous brother, Malifake. His carefully constructed mental walls, the psychic disciplines honed over centuries of lonely meditation, shattered like glass. He was no longer John Jones, detective, on the planet Earth. He was John Johns, the last son of Mars, drowning in the phantom heat of his people's funeral pyre. He could feel their terror, their agony, their melting flesh. He was helpless, a child again, watching his world burn. But through the roaring inferno of his memory, another sensation pierced the veil. A new fear. It was sharp and pure, and it was not his own. It came from the boy. John's telepathic senses, raw and overloaded, latched onto it. He felt the boy's heart hammering, his adrenaline spiking. He felt the terror of being held captive, the cold dread of a life threatened. But beneath that, buried under the instinctual fear for his own survival, was something else. Something John had not sensed with such purity in a very, very long time. The boy wasn't primarily afraid for himself. He was looking at the small flame licking at the villain's palm. He was looking at the ancient, dry wood of the shrine. He was looking at the trees outside. His fear was not he's going to burn me, it was he's going to start a fire. The whole forest could go up. People could get hurt. And then, he glanced at John. He saw the strange man's terror, a fear far greater than his own, and a new emotion bloomed in the boy's mind, overriding everything else, concern. He was worried about a complete stranger, a man who was frozen and useless, while he himself was in mortal danger. It was a shard of incorruptible, selfless heroism. It was the psychic equivalent of a cool hand on a fevered brow. It cut through the phantom flames, grounding John in the here and now. The screams of his people receded, replaced by the frantic breathing of the boy in the villain's grasp. Izuku's mind was racing. The man, the strange, terrified man, was useless. He was catatonic with fear. The villain was jumpy, his quirk was fire, and they were in a tinderbox. This was bad. This was beyond bad. All Might wasn't here. No hero was here. It was just him. A quirkless, useless Deku. You need to be realistic, All Might's voice echoed in his head. And for a split second, Izuku believed it. He was a hostage. He should just wait, hope the police got here in time. That was the realistic thing to do, but then his eyes fell on his bright yellow backpack, lying on the floor where he'd dropped it. It was heavy, filled with his notebooks, a water bottle, his lunchbox. It was a stupid, childish thing. Notebook 13. Weaknesses. Environmental factors. Distractions. His own analysis, his own obsessive hobby, screamed at him. The villain was focused on the entrance. He was unstable. A sudden, unexpected action could create an opening. He wasn't thinking about being a hero. He wasn't thinking about fame or glory. He was thinking that the fire could spread. He was thinking that the strange man looked like he was having his soul ripped out. He was thinking that something had to be done. Without another thought, fueled by 10 years of repressed instinct, Izuku acted. He twisted his body, a sudden, violent motion that surprised the villain holding him. In that single, fluid movement, he dipped down, grabbed the strap of his backpack, and flung it with all his might not at the villain's head, but at his hand. The one holding the flame, the heavy bag, filled with the weight of his useless dreams, collided with the villain's wrist. Thwack! The villain cried out in pain and surprise. The flame sputtered and died as his concentration broke. His grip on Izuku loosened for a single, crucial second. That was all the time John needed. The boy's action had been the final anchor. The selfless, reckless, beautiful act of a true hero's heart. The phantom flames in John's mind were extinguished, replaced by a cold, Martian calm. He moved. He didn't move like a human. There was no wasted motion, no sound of shifting feet or rustling cloth. One moment he was seated, a statue of terror. The next, he was standing directly behind the villain. He had crossed the 10 feet of space in the silent blink of an eye, phasing partially through the floorboards to avoid making a sound. The villain was still trying to figure out what had hit him, when 2 long, pale fingers pressed against the side of his neck. There was no force behind it, no violence. It was a touch as precise and delicate as a surgeon's. John applied a minuscule amount of pressure to a specific cluster of nerves. The villain's eyes widened. His body went completely limp, his weaponized hand falling uselessly to his side. He slumped forward like a puppet with its strings cut. Before he could hit the floor, John whispered a single word, a telepathic command that bypassed the man's ears and went straight to his consciousness. Sleep! The villain's eyes rolled back into his head. John caught him easily, lowering him gently and silently to the wooden floor. He then picked up the canvas bag of stolen goods and placed it neatly beside the unconscious man. The entire sequence, from the backpack throw to the villain's incapacitation, had taken less than 3 seconds. Silence descended upon the shrine once more. But this was a different kind of silence. It was charged, electric, filled with the impossible. Izuku stood frozen, his chest heaving, his mind refusing to process what he had just witnessed. The man hadn't punched the villain. He hadn't used a flashy quirk. He had just stopped him. Effortlessly, silently. It was the most incredible and terrifying thing Izuku had ever seen. The man in the trench coat turned to face him. The terror was gone from his features, replaced by an expression of deep, ancient melancholy. His startling red eyes seemed to look right through Izuku, not at his face, but into his very soul. Are you all right, child? His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, impossibly calm after the events that had just transpired. Izuku could only nod, his throat too tight to form words. He pointed a trembling finger at the unconscious thief. What? How did you? Was that your quirk? He finally stammered out, the question a reflex born from years of hero worship. The man's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. Something like that. He walked over to the entrance of the shrine and looked out into the clearing, his gaze distant. The sirens were closer now, their wail cutting through the quiet evening. The authorities will be here shortly. They will handle this. He turned back to Izuku, his expression unreadable. He had felt the boy's entire life story in the brief moment of contact. The diagnosis, the bullying, the unwavering admiration for heroes, the crushing despair on the rooftop. He had felt the purity of his intent, the steel of his spirit, a spirit that refused to be broken even when its dreams were. This boy was a rarity, not just on Earth, but in the entire cosmos. A heart so bright, housed in a vessel that believed itself to be worthless. You were very brave, the man said, his voice soft. Foolish, but brave. You acted when you had no power to do so. Why? The question cut through Izuku's shock. He looked down at his shoes. I don't know, he mumbled. My body just moved. I saw the fire, and you looked scared. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. The man's sad smile deepened slightly. You could not just do nothing. He repeated the words as if they were a profound cosmic truth. Even after being told that is all you are capable of. Izuku's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. How? How did you know that? The man took a step closer. The shadows in the shrine played across his features, and for a fleeting, impossible moment, Izuku thought he saw the man's skin shift, taking on a subtle, emerald hue. His form seemed to elongate, his head becoming more defined, his red eyes glowing with an inner light. It was there for a second, a hallucination born of shock and adrenaline, and then it was gone. The man was just a man again, tall and solemn in a trench coat and hat. "My name is John Jones," he said, though the name felt like a costume he was wearing. "And I have been on this world for a very long time. I have seen countless souls, many with abilities that could shatter mountains. I have seen heroes who can fly faster than sound and villains who can command armies." He paused, his red eyes locking with Izuku's. "But power is not a prerequisite for heroism. The will to act is. The compassion to care is. The heart to sacrifice is. You have that will, Izuku Midoriya, in abundance." Hearing his own name spoken by this impossible stranger sent a fresh wave of shock through Izuku. This man was something else entirely. Not a hero Izuku had ever read about. Not a quirk he could analyze. He was an enigma. The sirens were very close now, flashes of red and blue light beginning to filter through the trees. "They will ask you questions," John Jones said, his tone shifting to one of quiet urgency. "Tell them the thief ran in, you distracted him, and an officer in plain clothes subdued him. My appearance here would create complications." He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. It was a cool, firm touch, yet it felt as if it was holding the weight of galaxies. "Your dream is not dead, child. It is merely unrefined. You believe you need the strength to punch through walls. The world has enough of that. What it lacks are minds that can see the cracks in those walls, spirits that can mend the wounds of those crushed beneath them." He looked Izuku directly in the eyes, and in their crimson depths, Izuku saw a profound, star-spanning loneliness that mirrored his own. "Power is not a prerequisite for heroism. The will to act is. You have that will. Let me show you how to sharpen it." The offer hung in the air, more shocking than the silent takedown, more impossible than the flicker of green skin. The police were shouting in the woods now. Their flashlights cut beams through the growing dusk. Izuku, a boy whose dream had been pronounced dead not 2 hours earlier, stood before a man who fell to earth and felt the first, terrifying, exhilarating spark of its resurrection. He didn't understand. He didn't know who, or what, this man was. But he knew, with a certainty that resonated in the very marrow of his bones, that his life had just been irrevocably changed. "Who are you?" Izuku whispered, his voice trembling with awe. The man's faint smile returned, and for the first time, it reached his ancient, sorrowful eyes. "I am a friend," he said before melting back into the deepest shadows of the shrine, disappearing as silently and completely as he had appeared. "And I believe I can help." The week following the incident at the shrine was a disorienting blur for Izuku Midoriya. It began with a frantic yet gentle interrogation by the police, to whom he dutifully recited the cover story John Jones had provided. He described a plainclothes officer, tall, nondescript, impossibly fast, who had subdued the thief and then vanished before uniformed backup arrived. The police were skeptical but couldn't argue with the result. A known petty criminal tied up in a neat, if metaphorical, bow. Then came the conversation with his mother. Inko Midoriya, upon seeing her son escorted home by an officer after being involved in another villain incident, nearly vibrated into a different state of matter. Her tears were a torrent, her relief a palpable force in their small apartment. Izuku, for his part, felt a profound and heavy guilt. He told her a version of the truth, that he'd stumbled into trouble and a kind stranger had helped. He omitted the part about the man's skin turning green, his silent, terrifying speed, and the impossible, life-altering offer that now hummed in the back of his mind like a high-voltage wire. 2 days later, a simple, typewritten note appeared in their mailbox. It bore no stamp, no postmark. It contained only an address in a quiet, unassuming district of the city and a time. 3 p.m. Saturday. Izuku spent the next 3 days in a state of nervous agitation, torn between boundless excitement and crippling doubt. Was this real? Was he walking into a trap? Was John Jones just a man with a strange, subtle quirk and a flair for the dramatic? But the memory of those red eyes, ancient and knowing, and the feeling of a world of possibilities cracking open before him was too powerful to ignore. And so, on Saturday afternoon, having given his mother a vague excuse about a study group, he found himself standing before a drab, gray apartment building. It was aggressively average, a concrete block of anonymity tucked away on a street lined with identical concrete blocks. It was the last place one would expect to find a man who moved like a phantom and spoke of heroism in terms of philosophy. He found the apartment number, 3B, and hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorbell. This was it. The point of no return. He was either about to embark on the single greatest journey of his life or get himself into trouble so deep he'd never see daylight again. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, he pressed the button. The door opened instantly, without the slightest sound. John Jones stood there, dressed not in his trench coat and fedora, but in a simple dark turtleneck and slacks. In the sterile light of the apartment hallway, he looked both more and less human. His features were sharp, his posture impossibly straight, but the illusion of normalcy was thinner here. "Izuku Midoriya," he said, his baritone voice calm and even. "You are punctual. Please come in." Izuku mumbled a polite greeting and stepped inside, toeing off his red sneakers at the entrance as was customary. The interior of the apartment was a shock. He had expected something, clues to the man's identity. Mementos, technology, even a villain's lair. What he found was an almost monastic emptiness. The room was Spartan to the extreme. The walls were bare, painted a soft, neutral gray. There was a simple wooden table with two straight-backed chairs, a low couch with no cushions, and a single floor lamp. There were no photographs, no decorations, no television. The only sign of personality, the only splash of color or life in the entire space, came from the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that lined one entire wall. They were crammed with thousands of books, their spines a chaotic mosaic of titles and languages. Izuku's keen eyes scanned them, recognizing works on quantum physics, classical philosophy from both East and West, ancient history, modern psychology, criminology, and poetry in languages he couldn't even identify. This wasn't an apartment. It was a library with a bed. "Please sit," John said, gesturing to one of the chairs at the table. He moved to a small, equally Spartan kitchen alcove and returned with two steaming mugs of what smelled like herbal tea. He placed one in front of Izuku. Izuku sat, his hands clasped nervously in his lap. Thank you, Mr. Jones." "John," the man corrected gently, taking the opposite seat. "You may call me John." "John," Izuku repeated, the name feeling strange and alien on his tongue. He looked at the man across from him, the question he'd been screaming internally for days finally bubbling to the surface. "Who? What are you?" John took a slow sip of his tea, his red eyes watching Izuku over the rim of the mug. The silence stretched, and Izuku felt as if he were being x-rayed, his entire being catalogued and analyzed. "I am the last of my kind," John said finally, his voice laced with a sorrow so profound it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. "My world was called Malik Andra. In your language, you would call it Mars. I am a Martian." The confession was delivered with the flat finality of a historical fact. Izuku's mind, which had been preparing itself for any number of fantastic quirk-based explanations, simply short-circuited. An alien, a literal man from Mars. His jaw hung open, his brain cycling through 1,000 frantic thoughts, none of which formed a coherent sentence. "I understand this is difficult to process," John continued, his expression unchanged. "Believe me when I say my existence is a complication I would prefer to avoid. I have lived here, among you, in quiet solitude for a great many of your years. But in you, Izuku, I saw something I thought had been extinguished in the universe. A pure, untempered will to do good, untainted by a desire for power or fame. I cannot, in good conscience, allow such a spirit to wither on the vine." Izuku finally found his voice. "So, you're going to train me? Like with weights? And fighting? Are you going to give me powers?" The last word was a hopeful whisper. A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, danced in John's eyes. "No. Your training will have nothing to do with lifting weights or throwing punches. All might is preparing your body to become a vessel. I will prepare your mind to become a weapon." He gestured to the mug in front of Izuku. Tell me about the tea. The question was so jarringly out of place that Izuku blinked. The tea? Describe it. It's hot, Izuku said, feeling foolish. It's in a plain white mug. It smells like chamomile? And maybe mint? Those are its physical properties, John said. Facts. Data. They are useful, but they are only the surface. True understanding lies deeper. Close your eyes, Izuku. Hesitantly, Izuku obeyed. Quiet your mind. John's voice seemed to come from inside his head now, a gentle, guiding presence. Silence the frantic analysis, the worry, the excitement. Let it all fall away. Be still. Now reach out, not with your hands, but with your senses. Your intuition. Feel the tea, Izuku tried. He focused on the warmth seeping into his palms, the steam ghosting against his face. It was just tea. What was he supposed to be feeling? You are still thinking, John's voice instructed. Stop thinking. Listen, and then, John did something. Izuku felt a subtle shift in his own consciousness, as if a filter he never knew existed had been gently removed. The simple sensation of the tea deepened. He could feel the warmth not just as a temperature, but as a concept, a gentle, comforting energy. He could almost sense the memory of the sun on the leaves, the faint echo of the rain that nourished them, the quiet satisfaction of the person who had harvested and packaged them. It was a fleeting, impressionistic collage of sensations, but it was undeniably more than he had ever experienced before. He gasped, his eyes flying open. I felt the story, John finished for him. Everything and everyone has won. A hero who only sees the surface can stop a crime. A hero who understands the story can prevent one. This is your first lesson, empathy, not the simple pity or sympathy humans practice, but true, radical empathy. The ability to quiet your own soul and truly listen to another's. Lesson 1, Empathy. Their classroom for the next few weeks was the city itself. They didn't spar in a gym, they sat in cafes. John would order them both drinks and then instruct Izuku to listen to the room. The first time was overwhelming. John guided him again, gently opening that psychic filter, and Izuku was hit by a tidal wave of raw, unfiltered emotion. He was in a small, quiet coffee shop, but the emotional noise was deafening. There was the barista's jagged, high-frequency anxiety about a big exam, laced with the dull throb of exhaustion. A young couple in the corner pulsed with a bright, warm glow of new love, so intense it was almost sickeningly sweet. An elderly man reading a newspaper radiated a soft, gray melancholy, a loneliness that felt as deep and cool as a well. A businessman near the window was a hornet's nest of impatience and frustration, a sharp, stabbing energy directed at his phone. Izuku flinched back, pressing his hands to his temples. It's too much, he gasped. It's so loud, because you are trying to hear it all at once. John's voice soothed in his mind. You are standing in the middle of an orchestra, trying to listen to every instrument simultaneously. You must learn to focus. Isolate one. The student. Hear only her music. Izuku took a shaky breath and tried. He focused on the image of the young woman behind the counter, her brows furrowed in concentration as she frothed milk. He pushed away the lover's glow, ignored the old man's sorrow, and muted the businessman's rage. Slowly, painfully, the student's emotional sound became clearer. It wasn't just a single note of anxiety. It was a complex chord. Fear of failure, yes, but also a fierce determination, a thread of hope, and a deep-seated weariness. Good, John's mental voice praised. Now release it. Find another. The old man, Izuku shifted his focus. The man's sadness was different. It wasn't a sharp pain, but a gentle, pervasive ache. It was full of memories, faded images of a smiling woman, the sound of laughter in a house that was now quiet. It was a grief so old it had become a part of him, like the rings of a tree. A profound sense of respect and sorrow washed over Izuku, and he had to fight the urge to go over and just sit with the man. You feel it, John said, his actual voice startlingly loud after the intimacy of the mental contact. That is the core of it. To feel what others feel. It is a great power, Izuku, but also a great burden. You must learn to build shields, lest you drown in the sorrows of the world. Lesson 2, Observation. Once Izuku could reliably isolate and interpret the emotional currents in a room, John moved on to the next lesson. Empathy tells you what a person is feeling, John explained as they sat on a park bench, watching people pass by. Observation tells you why. The two are sides of the same coin. The internal and the external. You already have a talent for this, but your focus has always been on quirks and combat. You analyze heroes. Now you will learn to analyze people. He gestured to Izuku's notebook, which was, as always, clutched in his hands. Open it. But do not write about heroes today. Watch. Deduce. Izuku watched a woman hurry past, talking animatedly on her phone. His old instincts flared. Quirk could be sound-based, or perhaps a minor telepathy that requires verbal components. Low-level hero or civilian, not suited for direct combat. No, John said, having clearly read his surface thoughts. Look closer. What do you see? Izuku looked again, trying to apply the new filter. The woman was dressed in a sharp business suit, but her shoes were comfortable-looking running sneakers. One of her jacket buttons was mismatched. She was carrying a briefcase in one hand and a grocery bag with a single loaf of bread and a carton of milk in the other. Her shoes, they don't match her suit. Izuku began slowly, scribbling in his notebook. She changed into them, probably for a long commute. The mismatched button, she got dressed in a hurry this morning. The groceries, she's not going home, not with so little. She's probably going back to the office to work late, and is just grabbing something for a quick dinner. He paused, then connected the final piece. He could feel a faint thrum of stressed affection from her. She's talking to her child on the phone, Izuku said with sudden certainty, apologizing for missing dinner again. She's a single mother, working a demanding job. He looked up at John, his eyes wide with surprise at his own deduction. John gave a single, slow nod of approval. The story was always there, he said. You simply had to learn how to read it. Izuku's note-taking transformed. The pages, once filled with sketches of hero costumes and lists of super moves, began to fill with nuanced observations of human behavior. Man on train. Worn wedding ring, but a fresh 10-line where it should be. He keeps checking his phone, posture is defensive. Radiates an aura of anger and deep hurt. Possible recent separation or argument. Teenage girl by the fountain. Expensive brand name clothing, but it's slightly frayed at the cuffs. A faint, persistent anxiety clings to her, masked by forced nonchalance. Trying to fit in with a wealthier crowd at school, he was learning to see the city not as a backdrop for heroics, but as a tapestry of a million intersecting stories, each one complex and vital. He was learning to see people. Lesson 3, Mental Fortitude. The third lesson was the hardest. It took place back in the sterile silence of John's apartment. Every being has a weakness, John began, his voice taking on a somber tone. A vulnerability. For some, it is physical. For others, it is emotional. For my people, our greatest strength was also our greatest vulnerability. We were telepaths. Our minds were connected, a global consciousness. We shared our joys, our sorrows, our knowledge. He paused, and the air grew heavy with unspoken tragedy. But that connection also made us vulnerable to psychic plagues, to fears that could spread like fire. And fire was our undoing. An enemy turned our own minds against us, using fire as a psychic catalyst. It created a racial memory, a deep, instinctual terror so profound it could physically incapacitate a Martian. The flame itself cannot harm my true form, but the idea of it, the psychic echo, it is a scar on the very soul of my species. It is what you saw in the shrine. Izuku listened, his heart aching for his mentor. He finally understood the depth of the terror he had witnessed. It wasn't just a phobia. It was the ghost of a genocide. You too will face fire, Izuku, John continued. Not literal flame, perhaps, but fear. Despair. Rage. The villains you will face will try to break your spirit before they break your body. You must be stronger than them. Not in your muscles, but in your mind. You must build a fortress inside yourself. A place of absolute calm where you can retreat when the storm rages. He instructed Izuku to sit on the floor and close his eyes. We will build your sanctuary. Meditate. Find the quietest place in your soul. For hours, Izuku struggled. His mind was a noisy, cluttered place, filled with hero stats, self-doubt, and All Might's booming laughter. But with John's patient, telepathic guidance, he began to clear a space. He imagined a small, quiet library, much like John's apartment, but filled with his own notebooks. It was a place where everything was orderly, where every problem had a solution written down on a page somewhere. It was his mental fortress. Now I will test your walls, John warned. Suddenly, a wave of pure, unreasoning panic washed over Izuku. It was the feeling of falling from a great height, the gut-wrenching terror of imminent death. His breath hitched, and his heart hammered. Retreat! John's voice echoed in his mind. Go to your sanctuary? The fear is an illusion. It cannot touch you there. Izuku fought against the rising tide of terror. He pictured his library, the smell of old paper, the neat rows of books. He focused on the image with all his might, and slowly, the feeling of panic began to recede. It was still there, a storm raging outside his imaginary windows, but inside the library, he was calm. He was safe. They practiced this for days. John would project feelings at him, waves of despair, spikes of rage, chilling tendrils of fear, and Izuku would practice retreating to his mental sanctuary until he could do it in a split second, erecting his mental walls against the psychic assault. He was learning to control his own emotional responses, to be the calm center of the storm. The power you are destined to inherit, one for all, is a tempest, John told him one evening. It is fueled by emotion. Without control, it will shatter you. This fortress is not just to protect you from villains, Izuku. It is to protect you from yourself. The field test. After a month of intensive training, John declared it was time for a test. We are going to Shinjuku Station, he announced. At the height of rush hour, Izuku felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Shinjuku Station was less a building and more a self-contained, chaotic ecosystem. The sheer density of people, and by extension their emotions, would be a challenge of the highest order. Your task is simple, John continued, his red eyes serious. You will use everything I have taught you. You will shield yourself from the crowd, you will observe, and you will listen with empathy. Somewhere in that chaos is a pickpocket at work. You will find them. As they descended into the roaring heart of the station, Izuku immediately felt the psychic cacophony crash down on him. It was a million emotional broadcasts all screaming at once. The frustration of missed trains, the anxiety of being late, the joy of meeting a loved one, the bone-deep weariness of a long workday. It was a tidal wave of human feeling. Breathe, Izuku. John's voice was a calm anchor in the storm. Your fortress. Now, Izuku closed his eyes for a brief second and retreated into his mental library. The noise receded, becoming a dull, manageable roar outside his walls. He opened his eyes, feeling calmer, more centered. He was an observer now, not a participant in the chaos. He stood near a central pillar with John, scanning the river of humanity flowing past. John remained silent, offering no guidance. This was Izuku's test alone. For 10 minutes, Izuku saw nothing. He tried to tune his empathy, searching for a specific emotional frequency. What would a pickpocket feel? Excitement? Guilt? He tried focusing on people who felt nervous, but he just found a teenager on a first date and a man on his way to a job interview. He was looking for the wrong signal. Don't just feel. Observe, he reminded himself. He started watching people's hands and eyes. He noticed a man who seemed to be moving against the general flow of traffic, but he turned out to be a lost tourist looking for the right platform. It was harder than he thought. He needed to synthesize empathy and observation, internal and external. He quieted his mind again, and this time, he didn't search for nervousness or guilt. He searched for its opposite. In a sea of people stressed and rushing to get somewhere, a predator would be calm, focused. He filtered out the frantic energy, looking for a point of stillness, of predatory intent. He found it. It was a man in his 40s, unremarkable in every way. He wore a simple jacket and carried a folded newspaper. But his emotional signature was completely different from everyone else's. It was a cool, controlled hum of concentration. There was no anxiety, no impatience. He was working, now for observation. Izuku watched him. The man wasn't looking at the train schedule boards or his phone like everyone else. His eyes were constantly scanning the crowd, but not their faces. He was looking at purses, at back pockets, at backpacks left slightly ajar. He held the newspaper unnaturally high, using it as a screen for his movements. He flowed through the crowd like a shark, using its currents to mask his approach to a target. Izuku saw him select his next mark, a young woman struggling with a large suitcase, her purse dangling carelessly from her shoulder. The man began to drift towards her, his movements slick and economical. Izuku's first instinct was to shout, to run over and stop him. The heroic impulse, raw and powerful, surged through him. Control. He heard John's voice, a quiet whisper in his mind. What is the goal? To catch a single thief, or to help the victim without creating chaos? Think. He forced the heroic urge down, retreating back to his mental library. A direct confrontation was clumsy. It could cause a panic. The thief could have a quirk, or a weapon. A smarter solution was needed. He looked around, his newly trained eyes cataloging his environment. He saw the woman with the suitcase, the approaching thief, and about 15 feet away, a pair of transit police officers talking near a ticket gate. He had his solution. Izuku took the half-empty bottle of water from his backpack. He looked at John, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He started walking, plotting a course that would intersect with both the thief and his target. Just as the man's hand, shielded by the newspaper, began to move towards the woman's purse, Izuku executed his plan. He pretended to trip over his own feet, lurching forward with a theatrical cry of, "Whoa!" He fell, not hard, but with enough momentum to splash the contents of his water bottle all over the floor right at the thief's feet. The sudden commotion, the shout, and the splash of water made the thief flinch back instinctively, his hand darting away from the purse. The young woman turned, startled by the noise. The two transit officers looked over, their attention drawn by the disturbance. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Izuku said, scrambling to his feet and making a show of being embarrassed. "So clumsy of me." The moment was broken. The thief's window of opportunity had vanished. He shot Izuku a venomous glare, the cool concentration in his eyes replaced by frustrated anger. With the police now watching the area, he muttered a curse under his breath, turned, and melted back into the crowd, disappearing. Izuku helped the young woman with her suitcase for a moment, apologizing profusely. She just smiled, thanked him, and went on her way, completely oblivious to how close she had come to being a victim. Izuku walked back to John, his heart beating a steady, triumphant rhythm. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He hadn't used a quirk. But he had been a hero. John placed a cool hand on his shoulder. "Well done, Izuku," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. As they walked out of the station and into the cool evening air, Izuku felt a new kind of satisfaction settle over him. It wasn't the explosive, adrenaline-fueled thrill he had always imagined heroism would feel like. It was deeper, calmer. It was the quiet, profound satisfaction of understanding a problem and solving it with his mind. He had a long way to go. His body was still weak, and the power he was meant to inherit was a terrifying unknown. But for the first time, he felt like he truly had a weapon of his own. All Might was teaching him how to be a symbol. John was teaching him how to be a hero. He was learning the lessons of Mars, and he knew, with a certainty that shone brighter than any star in the night sky, that he was on the right path. The lesson for the day was invisibility, not the kind that came from a light-bending quirk or advanced technology. John's method was far more subtle, and in his estimation, far more effective. It was the art of becoming a ghost in plain sight. The human eye is drawn to motion, to anomaly, to intent. John's voice murmured, not in Izuku's ear, but directly in the center of his mind. They were in the middle of the bustling Kashi-Oiwake shopping district, a vibrant, chaotic river of humanity flowing through a canyon of shops and food stalls. To be invisible is to become part of the background noise. You must erase intent from your posture, your gaze, your very presence. Izuku stood near a takoyaki stand, the savory scent of grilled octopus and bonito flakes thick in the air. His task was simple: to cross the 50-meter plaza to a designated bookstore without anyone giving him a second glance, without anyone bumping into him, without anyone truly noticing him. His first 3 attempts had been miserable failures. He had been jostled by a salaryman, yelled at by a woman whose cart he'd almost upset, and had a small child point directly at him and ask his mother why. "That boy was walking so weird, you are trying too hard." John's mental critique was gentle but firm. Izuku could feel his mentor's presence, a cool point of stillness observing from a second-story cafe window. "You are moving like a person trying not to be seen. That, in itself, is an anomaly. You must move like a person with no particular place to go, yet a perfect reason for being where you are. You are a leaf in the stream, not a rock fighting the current." Izuku took a deep breath, pushing down his frustration and retreating to the quiet sanctuary of his mental library. The cacophony of the crowd's emotions, once a deafening roar, was now a manageable hum outside his psychic walls. He had learned to filter, to exist within the noise without being consumed by it. He tried again. This time, he didn't focus on the goal, the bookstore. He focused on the journey. He let his shoulders slump slightly, adopting the posture of a tired student heading home. He let his gaze go soft, not scanning for a path but simply observing, his head turning with idle curiosity to a shop window display, then to a flight of pigeons. He matched his pace to the rhythm of the crowd, speeding up and slowing down with a natural ebb and flow. He wasn't a spy on a mission. He was just another boy in the city. It worked. People parted before him as if by magic. He slipped through gaps he hadn't seen before, his presence so unremarkable that others unconsciously adjusted their paths without ever registering his existence. He was just part of the scenery, a background character in 1,000 other people's stories. When he reached the bookstore's entrance, his heart was pounding not with exertion, but with a quiet, thrilling sense of accomplishment. "Better!" John's voice resonated with approval. The first tool of a hero is not a fist, but the ability to choose the terms of engagement. Sometimes, that means being the storm, but more often, it means being the ghost who walks through it unseen. The lesson lingered with Izuku long after he had politely excused himself from John's tutelage for the day. As he walked the familiar route home, his backpack slung over his shoulder, he found himself practicing. He moved through the afternoon crowds not as Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless, anxious boy, but as the ghost. He observed. He listened. He noted the weariness radiating from a construction worker, the dust on his boots telling a story of a long day. He saw a young couple, their argument a silent, crackling energy between them, their hands held just a little too stiffly. He used his empathy, not to intrude, but to understand the emotional texture of the world around him. This was his new analysis, a deeper layer added to his years of quirk study. It was this heightened state of awareness that made him notice the trouble before anyone else did. It started not with a sight, but with a smell, the acrid tang of smoke. Then came the sound, a distant explosion, a sharp boom that rattled windows and sent a flock of birds scattering into the sky. Immediately, a spike of raw, collective panic bloomed in the city's emotional landscape. Izuku felt it like a physical blow, a wave of fear and morbid curiosity washing through the streets. His feet were moving before his conscious mind had made a decision, carrying him toward the chaos. It was an old, ingrained reflex, the pull of a heroic spectacle. But this time, something was different. The fanboyish excitement that usually accompanied such an event was absent, replaced by a cold, analytical calm he'd learned from John. He wasn't running to watch. He was running to assess. He rounded a corner and saw the scene. It was an alleyway clogged with fire, smoke, and heroes. The villain was a horrifying, amorphous entity of green sludge, a larger and more violent version of the one who had attacked him just weeks before. It had a victim, and as Izuku's eyes adjusted to the swirling chaos, a gut-wrenching, icy dread washed over him. Wild, ash-blonde hair. Desperate, furious red eyes. The crackle of small, contained explosions popping from struggling hands. Kaken. For a moment, the ghost vanished, and Izuku Midoriya, the terrified boy, returned. His breath caught in his throat. Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, the explosive, invincible symbol of victory in his life, was trapped. He was drowning. His powerful quirk was useless, the explosions only serving to detonate the flammable liquids in the alley, making the fires worse. The pros were on the scene, but they were trapped in a strategic nightmare. Izuku's mind, honed by John's lessons, didn't just see heroes. It saw a complex problem with multiple failing solutions. He instantly opened a fresh page in his mental notebook. Target: amorphous sludge villain. Sentient liquid form. Hostage taken: Katsuki Bakugo. Abilities: engulfment, suffocation, high mobility in liquid state, apparent resistance to blunt force trauma. Weaknesses: predominantly liquid. Lacks solid internal structure. Possesses solid sensory organs, eyes, teeth, which appear to be its only consistent physical anchor points. Assets on scene: Kamui Woods, wood-based quirk. Ineffective and hazardous in a high-fire environment. Currently relegated to civilian rescue and containment. Assessment: correct tactical choice, but removes a key player from the primary engagement. MT Lady, gigantification quirk. Cannot enter the narrow alleyway without causing catastrophic collateral damage. Assessment: power is useless without the proper arena. Death Arms, super strength quirk. Unable to gain purchase on the villain's fluid body. His punches pass through with minimal effect, like punching water. Assessment: applying the wrong tool. Brute force is failing. Backdraft, water quirk. Critical asset, but is stretched thin. Forced to choose between fighting the fires, protecting civilians, and attacking the villain. He is trying to do all three and succeeding at none. Assessment: resources are improperly allocated. Overwhelmed. Civilian response: crowd is a liability. Their presence is blocking access for other emergency services and distracting the heroes. Emotional state: high panic, high curiosity. A dangerous mix. Hostage status: Katsuki Bakugo. Quirk: explosion. Highly powerful, but detrimental in this situation. His struggles are fueling the fires. His pride is preventing him from ceasing his resistance, even if he realizes it's making things worse. He is suffocating. Time is critical. Izuku watched Death Arms throw another fruitless punch that was simply absorbed by the sludge. He saw Kamui Woods desperately creating barriers to keep the flames from a nearby apartment building. He heard the crowd murmur, wondering where All Might was. And in that moment, Izuku felt a profound clarity. All Might wasn't here. And even if he were, he might face the same problem as Death Arms. The heroes weren't failing because they were weak. They were failing because they were thinking like heroes: direct confrontation, application of power. They were trying to fight a flood with a hammer. He looked at the scene again, but this time through John's lens. He ignored the heroes, the villain, the victim. He looked at the environment itself. The alley was a toolbox. A broken traffic sign, its metal post bent at a 45-degree angle. A fire hydrant on the corner, its paint chipped but its structure sound. Loose debris from the explosions, bricks, pieces of concrete, shattered glass. The water from backdraft hoses was pooling near a drain, creating a slick surface. And then he saw it. A perfect, desperate, insane plan. A sequence of actions. It wasn't a hero's plan. It was a ghost's. It relied on precision, timing, and misdirection, not power. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the cold steel of his resolve. You need to be realistic. All Might's voice echoed in his memory. This was the opposite of realistic. This was suicide. Fear is a weapon. John's voice answered from his memory. It can be used against you, or you can use it to sharpen your mind. Retreat to your sanctuary, Izuku. Analyze. Do not feel. He took a breath and did as he was taught. He retreated into his mental library. The roar of the fire, Bakugo's choked gasps, the panic screams of the crowd, they all faded into a distant hum. In the calm, quiet space of his mind, he laid out the plan. Objective: create an opening. Disrupt the villain's cohesion and expose a weak point. Step 1: infiltration. The crowd is a barrier, but also camouflage. Use the ghost technique to move through them to the edge of the police line. Step 2: misdirection. The villain's attention is focused on Bakugo, and the hero is in front of it. It will not expect an attack from the flank. Step 3: acquire tool. The broken signpost. Heavy, but provides leverage. Step 4. Create event. Use the post to rupture the fire hydrant. The sudden, high-pressure jet of water will be unexpected and difficult for a fluid body to counter. It will be a more powerful, concentrated blast than backdraft can currently manage. Step 5. Target weakness. The primary goal of the water is not to damage the villain, but to force it to react, to shield its core weakness, its eyes. This will create the critical moment of distraction. It was a plan built on quirkless ingenuity. It was a plan that might just work. And it was a plan that would get him killed if he hesitated for even a second. He looked at Bakugo, whose explosive struggles were growing weaker, his eyes wide with a terror Izuku had never seen in him before. The sight shattered the last of his hesitation. He moved. He pulled his hood up, ducked his head, and became the ghost. He slipped into the crowd, his presence so unremarkable that no one noticed the small, green-haired boy moving with quiet purpose toward the danger zone. He didn't push or shove. He flowed through the gaps, a leaf in the stream of panicked onlookers. He reached the police tape, and with a dancer's grace, slipped under it when the officer's back was turned for a moment. He was inside the perimeter. No one saw. The heat from the fires was a physical blow, a searing wall of air. He could feel his skin prickle, a primal fear of the flames threatening to surface. He pushed it down, his mental walls holding firm. He moved low and fast, using a burned-out car as cover, making his way toward the bent signpost. His lungs burned with the smoke. Every instinct screamed at him to run away, to find safety. But the image of Bakugo's terrified eyes was burned into his mind. He reached the signpost. He wrapped his hands around the cool metal. It was heavier than he expected. He gritted his teeth, his thin arms straining as he wrenched it from the cracked concrete. The metal groaned in protest, then came free with a shower of dust and pebbles. He now had his tool. It was clumsy, unwieldy, but it would have to do. He crouched behind a pile of debris, the signpost held like a knight's lance. He was about 20 yards from the villain's flank. He could see the slimy, pulsating movement of its body, the way it seemed to gloat as it squeezed the life out of his rival. Now for the feint. He shrugged off his bright yellow backpack. It was a beacon of color in the grim, smoke-stained alley. The villain's eyes, large and maniacal, were locked on the struggling Bakugo. Izuku needed to draw their attention, if only for a second. With a grunt, he hurled his backpack not at the villain's main body, but high and to the left, aiming for a wall just above and behind its head. The yellow bag sailed through the air and struck the brick wall with a loud, unexpected smack. The effect was instantaneous. The villain's massive eyes swiveled toward the sound and the flash of color, its monstrous form tensing in surprise. It was a flicker of a reaction, a half-second of distraction, but it was everything. Izuku exploded from his cover. Adrenaline surged through him, hot and electric. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was acting. His legs pumped, his worn red sneakers slapping against the wet asphalt as he charged, not at the villain, but at the fire hydrant. He held the metal post forward, the jagged, broken end aimed at the hydrant's main valve. The villain's eyes snapped back from the backpack, widening as they registered the small, determined figure charging from its blind spot. A tendril of sludge lashed out toward him. It was too late. With a final, desperate surge of strength, Izuku plunged the end of the signpost into the side of the fire hydrant. The sound was a deafening crack of tortured metal. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, the valve casing shattered, and with the force of a cannon shot, a torrent of pressurized water erupted from the hydrant. It wasn't a spray, it was a solid, focused jet of pure kinetic energy. It slammed into the sludge villain's side, not just splashing it, but tearing into its fluid form. The villain let out a gurgling, inhuman roar of shock and pain. The focused blast was something its body wasn't designed to handle. It was like trying to hold back a river with a net. The water jet struck its face, and the villain did exactly what Izuku had predicted. It recoiled violently, its form instinctively contracting to protect its vulnerable eyes from the high-pressure onslaught. And in doing so, for the first time since the fight began, its grip on Bakugo loosened. A gasp of air. A single, precious, desperate intake of breath from the hostage. That was the opening. And it was an opening that had been seen. "I really am pathetic," a voice boomed, and Izuku, stumbling back from the force of his own attack, looked up. All Might, in his skeletal form, had been in the crowd, his time limit exhausted, watching in horror and shame. But the boy, the same boy from the rooftop, the one he had told to be realistic, had just done the impossible. He had changed the battlefield. The sight of that selfless, insane bravery had pushed All Might past his breaking point, forcing his battered body to dredge up the last, fiery dregs of his power. Steam billowed. Muscles expanded. A shadow fell over the alley as the symbol of peace materialized from the smoke, his trademark smile a grim line of determination. "I told you about the qualities that make a true hero," he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos as he charged forward. "But I see I wasn't just lecturing you. I wasn't practicing what I preached." He reached the villain just as it was trying to reform, its body still disrupted by the water jet. Detroit. Smash! All Might's fist collided with the villain. The punch was aimed not just at the sludge, but at the very air itself. The shockwave was biblical. It was a physical manifestation of hope. It blasted the villain apart, its liquid body atomizing into 1,000 harmless droplets. The force of the blow was so immense it ripped through the alley, extinguished the flames, and changed the weather. The sky, once clear, clouded over. And it began to rain. The sludge washed away. Bakugo collapsed to the ground, coughing and gasping, but alive. Izuku stood frozen, drenched and trembling, the bent signpost still clutched in his hand. He had done it. His insane, quirkless plan had worked. The aftermath was a blur of noise and motion. Paramedics rushed to Bakugo. The other heroes, their expressions a mixture of shock, relief, and bewilderment, secured the scene. Izuku was immediately surrounded. "Are you nuts, kid? That was reckless. You could have been killed." Death Arms scolded, though there was a note of grudging respect in his voice. Kamui Woods added, "We had it under control. You should have left it to the pros." But his eyes kept flicking from Izuku to the ruptured hydrant to the dissipated villain, a look of dawning realization on his wooden face. He knew they hadn't had it under control. Izuku just mumbled apologies, his adrenaline crashing, leaving him shaky and exhausted. He caught Bakugo's gaze from across the alley. There was no gratitude there, only a burning, furious, and utterly confused humiliation. This was worse than being saved by a top hero. He had been saved by Deku. Useless, quirkless Deku, who hadn't even used a quirk to do it. The foundations of Bakugo's world had been cracked. Izuku slipped away before the media could descend, his heart a confusing mix of elation and dread. He had acted. He had saved someone. But he had also broken every rule. He had been reckless. He had been a hero. He was taking a shortcut home, his mind still reeling, when a familiar voice called out, "DKU!" Izuku flinched, turning to see Bakugo storming toward him, his face a mask of rage. "I didn't need your help," he snarled, his hands sparking. "I had him. You didn't save me. You're a quirkless nobody. Don't you dare look down on me." Got it? With that, he spun on his heel and stomped away, leaving Izuku alone with the weight of his rival's anger. Izuku sighed. Some things, it seemed, would never change. He was about to continue on his way when another voice, this one far more resonant, stopped him in his tracks. "I am here." Izuku turned to see All Might, in his hero form, strike a pose at the end of the street. He quickly deflated into his skeletal form with a gout of steam, looking haggard but determined. He jogged to catch up with Izuku. "Young man," Toshinori Yagi began, his voice serious. "I've come to thank you. And to apologize. And to make a proposition." They stood there on the quiet residential street as Toshinori explained. He had seen everything. He had been a bystander, helpless, until Izuku's charge had inspired him to push beyond his limits. "All the top heroes, we all have stories from our school days," Toshinori said, a newfound respect shining in his sunken eyes. "Most of our stories have one thing in common: our bodies moved before we had a chance to think." He looked at Izuku, and his expression was one of profound awe. "But your body moved, yes. But it was because you had thought. I was watching you from the crowd. I saw you analyzing the scene. I saw the moment you formulated a plan. You didn't just run in blindly. You ran in with a strategy that none of us on the scene had considered. A strategy that worked. He took a step closer, his gaze intense. I told you to be realistic. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. Young man, today you proved me wrong. You showed me that what I thought was realism was merely a limitation of my own imagination. You have the mind of a great hero, the instincts of a great hero, and the heart of the greatest hero I have ever seen. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, the words he had longed to hear his entire life finally being spoken by the one person who mattered most. Toshinori's face broke into a wide, genuine smile. Therefore, he declared, pointing a bony finger at Izuku, his voice swelling with passion, I deem you worthy of my power. My quirk is yours to inherit. Izuku stared, the world tilting on its axis. He knew this was coming. He had seen the potential, heard the words on that rooftop weeks ago. But now, it was different. It wasn't an offer born of pity for a brave, foolish boy. It was an offer made out of respect for a sharp, tactical mind. I want to give you my power, All Might said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a desperate, burning hope. So that you can take that incredible mind and that indomitable heart of yours, and you can give them the strength they need to change the world. He spread his arms wide, a skeletal angel in the setting sun. Young Midoriya, you can become a hero. And as the tears finally fell, hot and cleansing, Izuku Midoriya knew that this was not the end of his story. It was the end of the beginning. He had been a boy who dreamed. He had become a student who learned. Now, he was about to become a vessel for the greatest power the world had ever known, guided by the wisdom of a man who had already lost his own world. The path forward was terrifying, but for the first time, it felt undeniably, absolutely real. The world felt different. As Izuku Midoriya walked home from his encounter with All Might, the setting sun seemed to paint the sky in hues he'd never seen before. The familiar drone of evening traffic sounded like a symphony. The scent of cherry blossoms from a nearby park was so sharp and sweet it made his heart ache. Every sensation was amplified, filtered through the lens of a single, world-altering phrase. My quirk is yours to inherit. A sun had risen in his soul, so bright and hot it threatened to incinerate the years of darkness and doubt that had defined him. He felt light enough to float, his feet barely seeming to touch the pavement. All Might, his idol, his god, had not only told him he could be a hero, he had chosen him. Him. Quirkless, useless Deku. He was going to be the successor to the symbol of peace. He wanted to scream it from the rooftops. He wanted to run home and tell his mom that all her years of worry were over, that her son's impossible dream was about to become reality. He wanted to find John and tell him that his faith had been rewarded, that a path had opened where none existed before. But as he walked, the initial, blinding ecstasy began to recede, and a colder, more complex emotion crept into its place. Doubt. It started as a small, nagging whisper in the back of his mind, a dissonant note in the triumphant symphony. John's lessons had been about sharpening his mind, about using empathy and observation as his primary tools. He had just proven, in the alley with the sludge villain, that a quirkless boy with a plan could change the outcome of a battle. He had found a new path to heroism, one built on his own merits, his own intellect, his own spirit. He was proud of that. It was the first time in his life he had felt truly, undeniably capable. And now, he was being offered a shortcut. A golden ticket. The greatest power on earth, handed to him not because he had developed it, but because he had stumbled into the right place at the right time. The whisper of doubt grew louder. Is it right to accept this? Isn't this a betrayal of everything John has taught me? To rely on a borrowed power instead of my own mind? The feeling was deeply unsettling. He felt like a fraud. A student who had just passed a difficult exam with his own hard work, only to be offered the answers to every test for the rest of his life. Would he still study? Would he still strive? Or would the sheer, overwhelming power of one for all become a crutch, eroding the very qualities that had made All Might deem him worthy in the first place? He was being pulled in two different directions by the two most important figures in his life. All Might, the sun, offered him a hero's power. John, the quiet moon, was teaching him a hero's wisdom. Could he truly follow both? By the time he reached the drab, gray apartment building, His mind was a maelstrom of conflict. The elation had curdled into a profound anxiety. He needed guidance. He needed the perspective of a man who had seen the rise and fall of worlds. He knocked on the door to apartment 3B. It opened with its customary silence. John stood there in his simple turtleneck, his red eyes immediately registering the turbulent war of emotions raging within the boy. "Izuku," he said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the storm of Izuku's thoughts. "Something has happened." It wasn't a question. Izuku stepped inside, the Spartan quiet of the apartment a stark contrast to his own inner chaos. He didn't even wait to be offered a seat. The words just tumbled out of him, a frantic, desperate confession. "All Might," he gasped, his voice trembling. "He was there. At the sludge incident. He saw what I did. He offered me his quirk. He said he can pass it on to someone else, and he chose me. He wants me to be his successor." He paced the small living area, his hands waving in agitation. "I should be happy. I am happy. It's everything I've ever dreamed of. But it feels wrong. It feels unearned. You've been teaching me how to be a hero without a quirk, how to use my mind. And now I'm just being handed this incredible power. It feels like I'm cheating. It feels like I'm abandoning the path you set me on, and I haven't even taken the first real steps yet." He finally stopped, his shoulders slumped, his chest heaving with the force of his confusion. He looked at John, his eyes pleading for an answer, for a solution to the impossible equation in his heart. John listened with an unwavering, patient stillness. He waited until Izuku's torrent of words had subsided, his presence a calming balm on the boy's frayed nerves. He gestured to the simple wooden table. "Sit, Izuku. Breathe." Izuku obeyed, sinking into a chair, the frantic energy draining out of him, leaving a hollow exhaustion in its wake. John prepared 2 mugs of the same herbal tea from their first meeting and sat opposite him. "On my world," John began, his voice soft and measured, "we did not earn our abilities. A Martian was born with the capacity for telepathy, for flight, for shape-shifting, as naturally as a human is born with the capacity for sight and sound. It was not a reward for virtue. It was simply the nature of our existence." Was a newborn Martian infant a fraud for possessing abilities it had not yet earned? Izuku shook his head mutely. "Of course not," John continued. "Power, in any form, is a tool, Izuku. Nothing more. Think of a blacksmith's hammer. In the hands of a craftsman, it can forge a plowshare to feed a village. In the hands of a murderer, it can be used to destroy a life. Is the hammer evil? Is it unearned? No. It is simply a potential. The morality, the worthiness, the earning of it, comes from the intent and the skill of the one who wields it." He leaned forward slightly, his red eyes intense. "This one for all is a tool of unimaginable potential. A hammer that can shape mountains. All Might has offered it to you not because you are strong, but because he has looked into your heart and seen a craftsman, not a destroyer. He saw you, a boy with nothing but your own courage, run into a fire to save another. He has deemed your spirit worthy of the tool." Izuku looked down at his hands, which were trembling. "But what if it changes me? What if I forget everything you've taught me and just rely on smashing things?" "That is a worthy fear," John said with a nod. "And it is a choice that will be presented to you every single day. But the lessons I am teaching you are not an alternative to this power. They are a prerequisite for wielding it responsibly. A man with a powerful hammer must have a steadier hand, a sharper eye, and a clearer mind than a man who works with his bare hands. Your training with me has not become obsolete, Izuku. It has become infinitely more critical." John reached across the table and placed a cool, long-fingered hand over Izuku's. The touch was grounding, and a wave of calm flowed into him, a gentle telepathic reassurance. "This power will not define you, Izuku Midoriya. You will define it. Your mind, your compassion, your spirit, these are the things that make you a hero. One for all will not be your soul, it will be the weapon your soul wields. Accept this legacy. Not as an unearned gift, but as a profound responsibility. The greatest responsibility of all." Izuku looked up, meeting his mentor's gaze. The conflict in his heart finally quieted, replaced by a deep, resonant clarity. He wasn't abandoning one path for another. He was merging them. He would be the mind and the might. I will, Izuku said, his voice clear and steady for the first time that evening. I'll accept. And I'll need your help. More than ever. A faint, rare smile touched Jonas' lips. That is why I am here. The next morning, at the crack of dawn, Izuku's new life began at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The place was less a park and more a monument to urban neglect. For years, illegal dumping and ocean currents had turned the once beautiful cove into a man-made mountain range of trash. Rusted cars, broken appliances, discarded furniture, and mountains of plastic waste were piled higher than a house, a testament to society's carelessness. It was a scar on the landscape. All Might, in his skeletal form, stood before the monumental mess, a determined glint in his eyes. This is it, my boy, he announced with a theatrical flourish. Your new gym. Your new school. Your crucible, he explained the reasoning. Izuku's body was an unprepared vessel. Pouring the ocean of one for all into a teacup would only cause it to shatter. For the next 10 months, until the UA high entrance exam, Izuku's task was to build his body into a worthy chalice. And his training regimen would be to clean the entire beach. Every last scrap. He presented Izuku with a color-coded, meticulously detailed, and utterly insane training schedule he called the Aim to Pass American Dream Plan. It covered everything from workout routines and sleep schedules to a diet plan so rigorous it made Izuku's eyes water. Heroism these days is all about flashy public service, All Might declared. But the roots of heroism lie in volunteer work, in helping the community. So you shall restore this coastline. This is you, giving back. It is a heroic act in itself, and so it began. The first few weeks were a special kind of hell. Every muscle in Izuku's body screamed in protest. He hauled waterlogged tires, dragged rusted washing machines, and carried bags of sodden refuse until his arms felt like they would fall off. All Might was a relentless, if cheerful, taskmaster, his booming encouragement echoing across the junkyard. Plus ultra, young Midoriya. Feel the burn. That's the feeling of your body getting stronger. But Izuku was not alone in his training. While All Might was the coach for his body, John became the trainer for his spirit. He wouldn't appear during the day, preferring to remain unseen. But in the evenings, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the mountains of trash, Izuku would feel a familiar, calming presence. John would be there, standing silently on a cleared patch of sand, a motionless figure against the vibrant twilight sky. While All Might's training was about exertion, John's was about recovery and focus. The pain you feel is a signal, John explained one evening as Izuku lay on the sand, every fiber of his being aching. It is your body telling you its limits are being broken and remade. Do not fight it. Do not ignore it. Listen to it. Understand it. And then, command it to be silent. He guided Izuku through meditative techniques, teaching him to isolate the pain, to observe it with a detached curiosity rather than being overwhelmed by it. He learned to control his breathing, to slow his heart rate, and to find a point of stillness within himself, even as his muscles twitched with exhaustion. It was during these sessions that the second phase of his mental training began. One for all is a river of pure energy, John said, his voice a low murmur in the quiet dusk. Before you attempt to channel a river, you must first understand the landscape of the riverbed. You must map your own body, not just its muscles and bones, but its energy pathways. He instructed Izuku to sit in a meditative pose, to close his eyes, and to look inward. Feel the life force that already exists within you. The subtle current that animates your form. Trace its path, from your heart down your arms to your fingertips. From your core down your legs to the soles of your feet. Know the channels. Know yourself. At first, Izuku felt nothing but the throbbing of his overworked muscles. But with John's telepathic guidance, a gentle nudge here, a subtle clarification there, he began to perceive it. A faint, warm current, like water flowing through unseen veins. He spent hours, every evening, simply sitting and visualizing these pathways, creating a detailed, intricate map of his own spiritual circulatory system. He was learning the shape of the container, preparing it for the power it was destined to hold. After 3 months of this dual training, a noticeable change had occurred. Izuku was still scrawny, but lean muscle now defined his frame. He could haul a refrigerator over his shoulder without collapsing. All Might was ecstatic with his progress. It was then that John decided Izuku was ready for the next, most crucial stage of his mental preparation. Visualizing the channels is not enough, John stated one evening. You must practice containing the flood. We will do so in a place where your physical body cannot be harmed. He instructed Izuku to sit opposite him on the sand. Clear your mind. Open it to me. Do not be afraid. Izuku closed his eyes and entered his meditative state. He felt John's consciousness gently brush against his own, not as an intrusion, but as an invitation. He let go, trusting his mentor completely. The world dissolved. The sound of the waves, the smell of the salt, the feeling of the sand beneath him, it all vanished. He was floating in a vast, silent, and starless void. It was not frightening, it was perfectly, absolutely calm. He was in his mind, but he was not alone. John's presence was there, a pillar of serene energy. This is a shared psychic space. John's thoughts resonated in the void, clearer than spoken words. A mind space. Here, we can create simulations. I cannot replicate the exact nature of One for All, but I can create an echo of its power, a phantom energy for you to practice with. In the void before Izuku, a swirling nebula of brilliant, emerald green energy began to form. It crackled and sparked with untamed power, a miniature star of terrifying potential. It felt ancient, powerful, and utterly overwhelming. This is your task, John instructed. Do not try to control all of it. That is impossible for now. Simply try to open one of the channels you have mapped, from your core down your right arm to your index finger. Create a conduit, a simple, narrow pipe, and allow a single drop of this power to flow through it. Izuku focused. He visualized the channel in his arm, a clear, unobstructed pathway. He then mentally reached out to the roiling green sun of energy and tried to draw a tiny wisp of it into the channel. The moment the phantom energy touched his psychic form, it was like trying to drink from a fire hose. The power surged violently, not flowing through the channel but obliterating it. His entire psychic arm exploded in a silent, painless flash of green light. The energy dissipated, leaving him feeling drained and shaken, even in this non-physical state. You tried to pull it. John's analysis was immediate. You must not pull. You must allow. You are not its master. You are its guide. The channel must be strong, the opening small. Try again. For months, this became their routine. By day, Izuku would physically haul wreckage, his body growing stronger with each passing week. By night, in the shared mind space, he would psychically practice containing the phantom of One for All. He failed hundreds of times. Sometimes the power would surge and dissipate harmlessly. Other times it would backlash, flooding his psychic form with a phantom agony that left him mentally exhausted for hours. But slowly, incrementally, he began to make progress. He learned how to form a stronger mental channel. He learned that the key was not to fight the power, but to yield to it, to create an irresistible path for it to follow. By the 8th month, he could successfully channel a small, controlled trickle of the phantom energy through his arm to his fingertip without his psychic form disintegrating. It was the mental equivalent of learning to walk. All Might saw the results, even if he didn't understand the method. Izuku's physical progress was explosive, far exceeding the projections of the American Dream Plan. His movements became more efficient, his focus absolute. When he lifted a heavy object, there was a grace and control to his posture that spoke of a deeper understanding of his own body. My boy, you're a natural! All Might would bellow, clapping him on the back with enough force to almost send him flying. Your dedication is second to none! Izuku would just smile, knowing that half his training was happening in a realm the symbol of peace could never imagine. Finally, the 10 months were over. The morning of the UA entrance exam had arrived. Izuku stood on the crest of a dune, looking out over Dagoba Beach. It was unrecognizable. The mountains of trash were gone. The sand was clean, golden, and pristine. The morning sun glinted off the gentle waves. He had moved a mountain, piece by piece. He had also remade himself. He took off his shirt. His body was no longer that of a scrawny, fragile boy. It was lean, corded with hard-earned muscle, and crisscrossed with faded scars from his labor. He was a vessel that had been forged in sweat and determination. "Izuku, my boy!" He turned to see All Might, his skeletal form seeming to swell with pride, his eyes misty. "You did it! You magnificent bastard, you really did it!" he cried, whipping out his phone to show Izuku a picture of himself from 10 months ago, a weeping, scrawny kid. Then he took a new picture of Izuku, standing strong and proud atop a pile of the last remaining scraps of trash, letting out a triumphant roar at the rising sun. "Excellent work!" All Might praised, his pride a tangible thing. "You are a worthy vessel! Now, it is time for your reward." He plucked a single strand of his golden hair. "The final step," he said, his expression one of solemn ceremony. "To inherit my power." He held the hair out to Izuku. "You must eat this." Izuku's triumphant expression slackened into one of utter bewilderment. After 10 months of brutal, back-breaking, mind-bending training, the epic culmination of his journey was this. Was all he could manage. He took the hair. It felt anticlimactic, ridiculous, and utterly surreal. But he had come this far. With a deep breath and a prayer that All Might was not, in fact, completely insane, he put the strand of hair in his mouth and swallowed. For a moment, nothing happened. Izuku stood there, feeling foolish. He had expected a flash of light, a peal of thunder, something, and then it hit him. It did not start in his stomach. It started in his soul. It was a sensation beyond physical description, a supernova igniting in the very core of his being. It was the feeling of a dam breaking, a river of starfire flooding every cell, every nerve, every atom of his body. It was raw, untamed, primordial power. It roared. It was a chorus of a million voices, the echoes of the previous wielders of One for All, their wills, their strengths, their histories crashing into him like a tidal wave. He felt their courage, their sacrifice, their anger, their hope. It was too much. The teacup was shattering. His consciousness, his sense of self, was dissolving, being swept away in the cataclysmic current. He was drowning. But as the roaring tide of power threatened to pull him under for the last time, he felt something else. A small, quiet, familiar place deep within him. A library. His sanctuary, the fortress he had spent months building. It was a tiny island in the middle of a raging cosmic ocean, but it was there. It was his anchor. "Breathe, Izuku," Jana's voice. It cut through the roaring chaos, a calm, clear bell in the heart of the hurricane. "You are not the storm. You are the stillness at its center. Find your channels. You have practiced this. You know the way. You are the master of the storm, not its victim." Izuku's mind latched onto the command. He stopped fighting the flood. He yielded. He focused on the mental map he had traced 1,000 times. He visualized the energy, not as an enemy to be fought, but as a force to be guided. He didn't try to stop it, he just tried to give it a direction, to contain it within the riverbanks he had so painstakingly prepared in his mind. He couldn't control it. Not even close. But he wasn't being destroyed by it either. He found a precarious, terrifying balance. He was a man clinging to a rock in the middle of the world's most powerful rapids, drenched and battered, but holding on. He fell to his knees on the clean sand, gasping, his body trembling violently. Sweat poured down his face. The roaring in his soul subsided, settling into a deep, powerful hum, like a nuclear reactor at idle. The universe was thrumming just beneath his skin. He slowly, shakily, raised his hand. It looked the same. But it felt completely different. He could feel it. The weight of a legacy. The power of generations. He looked up at All Might, who was staring at him with wide, astonished eyes. "My boy, you're still conscious." Izuku gave a weak, trembling smile. He was more than conscious. He was anchored. He was ready. The real work was about to begin.